When you think of hand embroidery, does an image of old ladies stitching flower patterns around a fire pop into your head? Well, that may have been the case 50 or 100 years ago, but today the art form has taken on a new life with a younger crowd. If you're not familiar, cross-stitching is a form of hand embroidery where X-shaped needle stitches are woven into fabric to create a unique design. People can work off a set pattern that's already drawn into the fabric, or they can create one from scratch as they go. During the process, a circular wooden embroidery hoop holds the fabric taut in place. Shannon Downey is an artist from Chicago that's turned her love for art and cross-stitching into a movement. Her designs are edgy, modern, and often focus on social injustices and current political issues. Some of her recent designs have tackled serious subjects, like the importance of being an informed voter, while others are light, whimsical quotes like, "January was a long year, but we made it." Her designs are wide-ranging, but they're refreshing and unique compared to the flowery patterns and landscapes of hand embroidery's past. So how exactly did Downey become a cross-stitching advocate and activist? Well, before she became involved in the Chicago art scene, she worked in the digital marketing space for more than a decade, running her own company.
I was connected to a device 24/7, working with clients that were all doing really good stuff in the world. And that was sort of my criteria for who I worked with. And I loved what I was doing, but I was really, really burnt out from constantly having to be available and accessible and connected digitally in order to do my job and in order to do the work. And as a business owner, you sort of don't get a respite from that. So it was just constant.
This continuous attachment to the online world eventually led Downey to reassess her lifestyle. On this path, she wanted to shift back to what she truly enjoyed: being artistic and creative. So she tried her hand at cross-stitching.
It just so happened that I was scrolling through Etsy and I found this Star Trek cross-stitch pattern. But I thought, well, I know how to cross-stitch. I learned that in 5th grade. I made a pink bunny. I never did it again. But I really liked how amusing it was to me to see this medium being used for something sort of pop culture-y. I bought it and I downloaded it and I stitched that weekend. And I realized not only did I not look at a screen for 2 hours, but I also didn't miss it because I was using my hands in almost the exact same way that you do when you're on your phone. And I just felt better. And so I started stitching every day.
This newfound hobby soon turned into more than just a pastime for Downey. Today, she uses cross-stitching to help bring people together and get them to disconnect from their phones and worries, at least for a short time.
I host a lot of workshops and stitch-ups because I want everybody making art. And it is such a gorgeous medium because the entry point, there's hardly any barriers to entry here. You can do it for almost free in terms of materials. I can teach you in 10 minutes, no joke, how to embroider. And you can immediately be successful and feel successful. And you just get better and better the more that you do it. But that's not the point. It can be the point. But making art is an experience, and it is a tool of expression and a contemplative tool and a tool for self-reflection.
Downey regularly hosts workshops where people can learn how to cross-stitch and connect with others through art. She's seen firsthand how such a simple activity can bring family, friends, and even complete strangers together in ways that go beyond the patterns they stitch.
The beautiful part to me is how so many of my workshops become intergenerational. And it's daughters who know my work and want to come do this thing. And they're bringing moms, grandmas, aunts to the workshops under the guise of embroidery. Right. And then, the sort of older folks that are showing up, and they're there because they're so excited that their daughter, niece, whatever, wants to be participating in this medium that they have always been doing. It's just super fun to see not only that, but the conversations that get started around it, and that folks are willing to be in that space and have really uncomfortable conversations about issues of social injustices because they're making something and they can come in and out of the conversations when they're comfortable. And so it creates a space for both self-reflection and conversation that they can dip in and out of.
One of the initiatives that Downey worked hard on is the hashtag End Gun Violence Craftivism project, which raised thousands of dollars for Project Fire, a Chicago-based organization helping youth affected by gun violence. So how did this idea begin? Downey says it all started with one cross-stitch.
Stitched a gun because I was thinking about gun violence, and so let me stitch on this and think about what I can do about it and what I can do for myself. And then when I put it on Instagram, I started to get a lot of people asking me to make it a pattern because they too wanted to stitch it. And so I thought, sure. I made it a pattern, a free pattern on my website. But then folks started stitching guns and tagging me in it on Instagram. And I was like, well, that's not working. Like, that's not taking me away from guns. But I started to see all these gorgeous textile pieces. So I asked folks, like, what are you going to do with these? They were like, oh, no, we're just stitching them. And I was like, will you send them to me and I'll do something with them?
Downey ended up receiving more than 250 cross-stitched pieces in the mail from 10 countries and 40 states. She decided to put on an art show in Chicago, displaying the fiber-based guns. But before the show took place, she wanted to get the young men and women from Project Fire, many of whom have never sewed in their life, to also create some art for the show.
I thought going in that I would have to do a lot of unpacking with them around gender bias and, just like all of the things that come with embroidery and just the perception of it. But I got there and they never even seen it before. So they were like, what are we doing? And I'm like, oh, we're going to paint with a needle and thread today. And they were like, cool. What are we painting? I'm like, guns. They're like, cool. And then within 15 minutes, they were all stitching and they loved it. They were just making art and talking to their friends and hanging out. And it was so refreshing to just be like, oh, great. I didn't have to do any heavy lifting here. Y'all are just into this and you like it.
After the cross-stitching session, the gallery show in Chicago opened to hundreds of people eager to see the designs and support a worthy cause.
We had a massive art show. It was so fun and so huge. And we sold all the pieces and raised over $5,000 that night. And we were able to fund the next semester of Project Fire. It was one of those moments where I thought, okay, this can be used for like hard outcomes. Like craftivism can be used for actual hard outcomes and like tangible change, right? Like we could see the results of this within that one night.
Something as simple as cross-stitching can start the conversations that lead to change. And for many, it's a dip into the unknown that can be scary at first, but rewarding in the long term.
It's interesting how so many people in my workshops at first are afraid. And I was doing workshops where I was giving people patterns and I was like, okay, this is what we're going to stitch today. And this is how you transfer a pattern. And I realized like, no, I want them to be even more uncomfortable. This is too easy because they were like, oh, well, mine doesn't look like yours, so mine's not good enough. Or her stitching is way better, right? So it was really comparative because we were all creating the same thing. And I hated that. And so I scrapped that. And now anybody who comes to my workshops, I think they're a little horrified at first because I'm just like, now you have to figure out what you're going to put on your fabric and then I'll teach you how to stitch it. And they're like, what do you mean? You're not going to tell us what to do?
Letting go of that control and slowing down can be tough in our high-pressure society. But Downey believes that in times like today, between a lightning-speed news cycle, constant political turbulence, and pandemic worries over coronavirus, cross-stitching can be an opportunity to let loose and have some fun.
It almost becomes therapy to get them to the place where they can even create, because we make all these rules and we live within all these rules about what is good. And, you have to be good at something. And I'm like, can't you just suck at it for a minute? Like, this is the first time you're ever doing it. So it's constantly encouraging people's bravery and people's just loosening up and letting go of this control. And then through making it, they start to relax. They start to have fun. They start to giggle.
You can view and support Shannon Downey's work, current initiatives, and future workshops on her website at badasscrossstitch.com or through her Instagram at badasscrossstitch. To find out more about Project FIRE and how to support the organization, visit projectfirechicago.org. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on Instagram and Twitter. This segment is written and produced by Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
Most primary care doctors expect to see more people with dementia over the next 5 years. But a new survey shows half of them don't think the medical profession is ready. Primary care physicians are on the front lines of dementia care, but nearly a third are never or only sometimes comfortable answering patient questions about it. Nearly 2 in 5 say they're never or only sometimes comfortable making a diagnosis. That's deeply concerning to Dr. Joanne Pike, Chief Program Officer of the Alzheimer's Association.
We're heading toward a medical emergency when it comes to ensuring dementia care will be available for all who need it. It's critical that stakeholders work together to reverse the shortage of dementia care specialists and enhance dementia care education for primary care providers.
The survey is part of the Alzheimer's Association 2020 Alzheimer's Disease Facts and Figures Report, which finds that, barring medical breakthroughs, the number of people with Alzheimer's dementia may nearly triple in the next 30 years. Find out more at alz.org.
Each day, the nation's opioid crisis takes more than 130 lives. For the first time, a person's lifetime risk of death from an accidental opioid overdose is greater than the odds of dying in a car crash. That's why the National Safety Council has assembled a comprehensive plan to address opioid misuse. The plan is endorsed by dozens of organizations, and NSC is offering it to every candidate for president. National Safety Council President and CEO Lorraine Martin.
This crisis requires a coordinated, immediate response from many groups, including governments, public health agencies, community groups, medical professionals, employers, and an educated public. Each of the actions we recommend is important, but requires the others to be successful.
The National Safety Council plan starts with strategies for prevention and education, along with prescribers, employers, data collection, insurers, law enforcement, and first responders, as well as treatment, recovery, and ending the stigma of substance use disorders. Find out more about the national plan for addressing opioid misuse at nsc.org/presidential plan.
Thank you for listening to Viewpoints Radio, a production of Media Tracks Communications. If you enjoyed this broadcast, please support our show by subscribing, sharing it with a friend, and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can find more Viewpoints stories on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and viewpointsonline.net. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Viewpoints Radio. Coming up next week.
You could buy bottles of tincture of cannabis from the big drug companies like Eli Lilly.
A brief history of cannabis and its introduction to the U.S. market. Then,
when you get the diagnosis of dementia, it is kind of terrifying.
An intimate and hopeful memoir of coping with Alzheimer's. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.